The wind in the Wyoming Territory did not simply blow, it scoured. It was a physical weight, a relentless, invisible hand that pressed against the chest and stripped the moisture from the eyes. Elias Thorne stood on the wooden platform of the Blackwood station, his hat pulled low to shield his face from the grit, listening to the telegraph wires sing their mournful, high-pitched song overhead. It was late October of the year 1887. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of early winter, stretching over a landscape that looked as though God had hammered it out of iron and forgotten to polish it. To the west, the broken hills rose like the spines of starving cattle. To the east, the grasslands rolled on forever, brown and brittle, waiting for the snow that would bury them deep. Elias checked his pocket watch. Though he knew the time, the train from Cheyenne was late. It was always late. He was 26 years old, though the sun and the wind had already etched fine lines around his eyes. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders from a life of lifting beams and wrestling calves. But he held himself with a quiet, shrinking posture, as if he were trying to occupy less space than he had been allotted. His hands, currently twisting the brim of his hat, were calloused and scarred. The hands of a man who could build a fence or calm a spooked horse. Yet they trembled now with a fear that no stampede had ever instilled in him. He was waiting for a wife. The thought made his stomach turn over. A slow, sickly rotation. He looked toward the end of the platform where the town of Blackwood began. It was a settlement that looked like it had been nailed together in one bad week, a collection of false-fronted buildings and raw timber shacks leaning into the gale. Two men were sitting on the porch of the general store, their boots propped up on the railing. One of them, a thick-necked ranch hand named Jeb, who had delighted in tormenting Elias in school, pointed a finger and laughed. The sound was snatched away by the wind, but the gesture was clear. "There goes Elias," they would be saying, too soft to court a girl, so he had to buy one from a catalog. Elias turned his back to them, staring down the iron rails that converged in the distance. He had not done this out of desire. He had done it because the silence in his half-finished cabin had become loud enough to scream at him. He had done it because a man alone in this country was a ghost before he was dead. And, if he were honest with himself, he had done it because the thought of walking into the brothel on the edge of town, or trying to speak to the devastatingly wholesome daughters of the church congregation, paralyzed him with a shame he could not articulate. A mail-order bride was a business arrangement. It was paper and ink. It was safe. Or so he had told himself when he sent the letter and the bank draft for her ticket 3 months ago. A low rumble vibrated through the planks beneath his boots. Black smoke smeared the horizon. The train was coming. Elias wiped his palms on his trousers. He felt a desperate urge to run, to mount his horse and gallop back to the safety of his empty claim. But his feet remained rooted. He was a man who kept his word, even when his word terrified him. The locomotive grew from a speck to a roaring, iron beast, grinding to a halt with a screech of metal that set Elias's teeth on edge. Steam hissed, enveloping the platform in a damp, sulphurous cloud. Passengers began to disembark. A salesman with a sample case, a family of homesteaders, looking bewildered and dusty, a few miners heading up to the hills. And then, her. She stepped down from the second car with a slow, deliberate movement, clutching a small, battered trunk with one hand and a worn leather Bible with the other. She wore a dress of dark gray wool that had seen better days, patched neatly at the hem. Her bonnet obscured her face until she lifted her chin to scan the platform. Clara Vance was not the blushing, rounded girl the advertisement might have implied. She was lean, sharp-angled, with pale skin that looked like it had not seen the sun in years. Her hair, tucked severely beneath her bonnet, was the color of dried wheat. But it was her eyes that stopped Elias's breath. They were blue, cold and flat, and they moved over the crowd not with curiosity, but with the rapid, calculating assessment of an animal looking for a trap. She saw him. She saw the way he stood apart from the others, holding his hat like a shield. She walked toward him, her movements smooth and contained. Elias swallowed hard. He stepped forward, his boots feeling heavy as lead. "Miss Vance?" he asked. His voice cracked, and he hated himself for it. She stopped 3 feet from him. She did not smile. She set her trunk down and folded her hands over the Bible. "Mr. Thorne." "Yes, ma'am. Elias Thorne." "Clara," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of the musicality he associated with women. It was a voice that expected nothing. "I trust the journey is over." "Yes, ma'am. The wagon is just over yonder." He reached for her trunk, but she flinched, her hand darting out to intercept his. For a second, her fingers brushed his wrist, cold and dry. She pulled back instantly, pulling her hand against her chest. "I can manage my own things," she said, her tone sharp, before smoothing it over with a practiced, hollow politeness. "It is not heavy. I wouldn't hear of it, ma'am," Elias stammered, stepping back to give her space. "It's the gentlemanly thing." She looked at him then, really looked at him, searching his face for the anger that usually followed a woman's refusal. When she found only a blushing, terrified confusion, a flicker of something like bewilderment crossed her face. She stepped back and nodded once. "Very well." Elias hoisted the trunk onto his shoulder. It was light, heartbreakingly light. Everything she owned in the world was in a box a child could carry. "This way," he murmured. They had to walk the length of the platform to reach the hitching post where his wagon waited. It was a walk that felt like a march to the gallows. The town of Blackwood had noticed the arrival. Conversations on the boardwalks died away. Heads turned. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the wind rattling the loose boards of the station house. Mrs. Gable, a pillar of the Methodist Church and the town's self-appointed moral arbiter, was coming out of the mercantile. She stopped, her eyes narrowing as they swept over Clara's gray dress and travel-stained hem. She sniffed, loud and distinct, and turned her back, pulling her shawl tight as if to protect herself from contagion. Clara did not flinch. She kept her chin high, her eyes fixed on the horizon. But Elias saw her knuckles turn white where she gripped her Bible. She knew. She had been on the ground for less than 5 minutes, and she already knew that she was the mail-order woman, a creature considered 1 step above a prostitute and 3 steps below a decent wife. As they passed the saloon, the door swung open. Jeb and his companion had moved from the store to the bar and back out again. "Well now," Jeb called out, his voice slurring slightly. "Looks like the package arrived intact. Eli, did you check the teeth? I hear they send the old ones out west when they can't work the cities anymore." Laughter rippled from the shadows of the porch. Elias froze. Heat flooded his neck, burning all the way to his ears. He should say something. A real man would drop the trunk and plant a fist in Jeb's face. A real man would defend his wife's honor. But Elias Thorne had never been a fighter. He was the boy who patched up birds with broken wings. The man who apologized when someone else stepped on his boot. The violence of men terrified him. Not because he couldn't physically match it, but because he didn't understand the language of it. He stood there, mouth opening and closing, paralyzed by the shame of his own inaction. It was Clara who moved. She stopped walking and turned her head slowly to look at Jeb. She didn't speak. She didn't scowl. She simply looked at him with those flat, dead eyes, an expression of such utter, bored indifference that it sucked the oxygen out of the taunt. It was the look of a woman who had heard every insult a man could invent and found this one lacking. Jeb's smile faltered. He shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable, and spat on the ground before retreating back into the saloon. Clara turned back to Elias. "Is the wagon far, Mr. Thorne?" "No," Elias whispered. "Just here." He helped her up to the bench seat. She gathered her skirts carefully, ensuring no fabric touched him when he climbed up beside her. He flicked the reins, and the team of bays lurched forward, pulling them away from the staring eyes of Blackwood and out into the vast, indifferent emptiness of the plains. The ride to the homestead took 2 hours. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels, The rhythmic thud of hooves and the incessant wind that hissed through the dry grass. The landscape was overwhelming in its desolation. To the north, storm clouds were gathering, dark bruises against the sky. The light was failing, turning the world into a grayscale etching of sagebrush and dust. Clara sat with her spine rigid, not leaning against the backrest. Her eyes never stopped moving. She watched the horizon, the gullies, the distant shapes of cattle. She scanned the land as if she expected an ambush. "It gets cold at night," Elias said finally, his voice startling them both. "There's a buffalo robe in the back if you're chilled." "I am fine," Clara said. She paused, then added, "Is it always this open?" "Yes, ma'am. There isn't a fence for 50 miles to the south, just grass and sky." "It is a good place to hide," she said, almost to herself. Elias looked at her sideways. "Hide?" She tightened her grip on the Bible. "To be alone. That is what I meant. It is a quiet place." "It is that," Elias agreed. "Lonely, some say. Loneliness is quiet," she said. "Noise is worse." They turned off the main trail onto a rutted track that led toward a small rise near the creek bed. The house sat there, stark against the twilight. It was a humble structure, half sod and half timber, with a roof that needed new tar paper and a porch that was barely framed out. A small barn stood to the side, leaning slightly to the east, shaped by the prevailing wind. "It isn't much," Elias said, the apology instinctive in his tone. "I've been meaning to finish the siding on the south wall, and the floor inside is just packed earth in the kitchen, though I laid planks in the bedroom." He stumbled over the word bedroom. It hung in the air between them, heavy and suggestive. Clara stared at the house. It looked small and fragile against the darkening sky, but there was smoke curling from the chimney. He must have banked the fire before leaving. "It has a door," she said. "And a lock?" "A sturdy crossbar," Elias promised. "I made it of oak." "Good." They pulled up to the house. The wind was howling now, a lonesome sound that made the warmth of the indoors seem like a distant dream. Elias helped her down, again noting how she braced herself before his hands touched her waist, and how quickly she pulled away once her boots hit the dirt. Inside, the house was clean. Surprisingly so. Elias was a tidy man. The main room served as a kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove radiating a dying heat. A table with 2 chairs sat in the center. To the right was a door that led to the only other room. Elias lit the kerosene lamp on the table. The golden light pushed back the shadows, revealing the sparseness of his life. A single shelf of books, a tin of coffee, a calendar from the feed store. "I have a stew on," Elias said, moving to the stove. "It just needs heating." "I can do that," Clara said, stepping forward. "That is part of the bargain." "You've had a long travel. Ma'am, sit, please." She hesitated, then sat on the edge of one of the chairs. She watched him as he moved. He was clumsy with the ladle, his hands shaking slightly, but he set a bowl before her with a reverence that was almost painful to watch. They ate in silence. The wind rattled the door on its hinges. Every time a coyote howled in the distance, a sharp, yipping cry. Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. When the meal was finished, the silence stretched thin. There was nothing left to do. The plates were cleared. The fire was banked. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. Elias stood up. He took his hat off and ran a hand through his hair. "I expect you'll be wanting to rest." Clara stood up too. Her face was pale, mask-like in the lamplight. "Yes, the bedroom is through there," Elias pointed. "I brought your trunk in." She walked to the door and opened it. She looked at the bed. It was a sturdy frame, covered in a patchwork quilt, with 2 pillows. It was the only bed in the house. She turned to face him. The practiced calm was slipping now. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She looked at the door, then at him, then at the bed. She was calculating the distance, the weight of him, the likelihood of survival. "Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was steady, but brittle as dry glass. "Elias, please, Elias." She took a breath. "We should speak of the arrangements before—" Elias stood by the table, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Arrangements? The marriage, she said. I am your wife. I signed the papers in the office in Cheyenne before the last leg of the trip, as the proxy required. I understand the duties. Duties? Elias echoed. He felt flushed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Clara began to unbutton the cuffs of her gray dress. Her fingers were efficient, mechanical. I am not a woman who plays games. Elias, I prefer to know the rules of the house. I cook, I clean, I mend, and at night— She paused. Her eyes locked onto his. There was fear there, a deep, ancient terror, but it was overlaid with a grim determination to control the moment. I need to know, she said. Can you make me come? The question hit the room like a gunshot. Elias blinked. The air seemed to leave his lungs. He stared at her, his mind reeling, trying to make sense of the words. He had expected her to ask for water, or privacy, or perhaps to pray. He choked. What? Clara took a step forward. Her expression was intense, searching. She wasn't asking out of lust. She was asking the way a soldier asks how many rounds are in the enemy's rifle. She needed to know the nature of the weapon aimed at her. She needed to know if he demanded a performance, if he expected her to feign pleasure to stroke his vanity, or if he intended to use her body with a skill that might be its own kind of trap. Can you? She pressed, her voice trembling just slightly. Because if you cannot, I need to know if you expect me to pretend. I need to know if I am to lie to you, or if you simply take what you are owed and sleep. Elias felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold. He looked at this woman, this stranger with the haunted eyes, and he felt a crushing wave of inadequacy. He was 26 years old. He lived on the edge of the world. He had never kissed a woman, let alone— He looked down at his boots, unable to meet her gaze. The shame was a hot, bitter taste in his mouth. I don't know how, he whispered. The silence that followed was absolute. I don't know how, Elias repeated, his voice cracking. He forced himself to look up, expecting to see disgust on her face. He expected her to laugh, like Jeb laughed. He expected her to realize she had sold herself to a man who wasn't even a man. I'm a virgin, ma'am. He braced himself for the ridicule, but it didn't come. Clara stared at him. Her hands stopped moving on her buttons. Her eyes widened, not with mockery, but with a sudden, jarring shock. And then, slowly, the tension in her shoulders collapsed. She let out a long, ragged breath that sounded almost like a sob. It was relief. You have never? She asked softly. No, ma'am, Elias said, miserable. I kept to myself. My mother raised me strict, and then, well, the brothels, He gestured helplessly. It didn't seem right, and I never had a sweetheart. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the cold calculation was gone, replaced by a tentative, confused wonder. A man who didn't know. A man who had no history of taking— You don't know how, she repeated, testing the words. I am sorry, Elias said. I know a wife expects a husband to be experienced. No, Clara said quickly. No. She took a step back, pulling her cuffs closed again. No, Elias, that is good. Good? It means we can wait, she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. It means you do not have habits. It means you do not require things. She looked at him with a new intensity. I do not want to be forced, Elias. I do not want to be used like a tool. If you do not know, then we can just sleep? Elias nodded vigorously. Yes, ma'am. I would never force you. I scarcely know how to touch a woman without trembling. To be honest— Clara looked at his hands, those large, scarred hands that were currently twisting the fabric of his trousers. She saw the truth in him. He was terrified of her. We agree then, she said. No demands, no lies. We sleep. And if the time comes where we must change that, we discuss it first. I swear it, Elias said. On my mother's Bible. Clara nodded. She walked into the bedroom, carrying her trunk. Elias followed, stopping at the doorway. I can sleep in the barn, he offered. or by the stove. "No," Clara said. She looked at the bed. "The town talks. If you sleep in the barn, they will know. They will think I am diseased, or you are weak. We must look like a marriage." She pointed to the bed. "It is large enough. You stay on your side. I stay on mine." "Yes, ma'am." They prepared for bed in separate corners of the room, turning their backs to one another to undress down to their undergarments. Elias blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The darkness was heavy. Outside, the wind had picked up, screaming around the corners of the house. Elias lay on the far left edge of the mattress, his body rigid, terrified that even his breathing might offend her. He could feel the warmth of her body a foot away, but he did not move. Clara lay on her back, staring up at the invisible ceiling. She was safe. For tonight, she was safe. The man beside her was a boy in a man's body, frightened and gentle. But as she lay there, her mind drifted back to the station. She had tried to push it away. The memory of the moment she stepped off the train. She had been scanning the crowd for her husband, but her eyes had caught something else. Standing in the shadow of the water tower, detached from the rest of the crowd, had been a man. He wore a long duster coat and a hat pulled low. He hadn't boarded the train. He hadn't greeted anyone. He had just stood there, rolling a cigarette, watching the passengers disembark. When Clara had stepped onto the platform, the man had stopped rolling the cigarette. He had looked at her. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't moved. He had just watched her with a calm, predatory patience. And then, as she walked away with Elias, she had seen him turn and walk toward the telegraph office. She squeezed her eyes shut. It was just paranoia. It was the ghost of the life she had fled. Her former owner, the man she refused to name even in her thoughts, was 1,000 miles away in St. Louis. He couldn't have found her this fast. He couldn't know, but the fear curled in her gut, cold and sharp. Outside, a coyote howled, a long, wavering note that sounded like a woman screaming. The wind rattled the boards of the house, testing the strength of the nails, looking for a way in. In the darkness, two strangers lay in the same bed, separated by a foot of cold quilt and a lifetime of damage. Both of them were afraid. Both of them were hoping that the morning would bring mercy, though the West was not a place known for it. "Good night, Elias," Clara whispered into the dark. "Good night, Clara," he whispered back. Neither of them slept for a long time. November settled over the Wyoming plains like a gray wool blanket, heavy and suffocating. The wind did not cease. It found every gap in the chinking of the cabin logs and whistled a high, lonely tune that grated on the nerves. For Elias and Clara, the days became a rhythm of survival that left little room for awkwardness. The land demanded labor, and it did not care about their strange, celibate arrangement. They fell into a routine born of necessity. Morning arrived before the sun. Elias would rise from the buffalo robe he had insisted on dragging to the floor, leaving the bed entirely to Clara. He would stoke the stove, break the ice on the water bucket, and head out to the barn. Clara would rise in the chill, dressing quickly, and take over the kitchen. It was hard work. The pump mechanism on the well was stiff with rust and cold, requiring 2 people to work it efficiently, one to pump, one to haul the heavy oak buckets. The fence line along the south ridge had been battered by stray cattle, the wire sagging and posts leaning drunkenly. On the 3rd day, Elias tried to stop her. "No, Clara," he had said, his hands fluttering uselessly as she lifted a roll of barbed wire. "That is too heavy. I can manage. Please, go inside where it is warm." Clara had not dropped the wire. She had looked at him, her face flushed from the exertion, her breath pluming in the cold air. "I am not a china doll." "Elias," she had said, "and I am not a guest. If I do not work, I do not eat. That is the way of the world." She had marched past him, boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. Elias had watched her go, a mixture of shame and admiration warring in his chest. He was used to the women of the town, fragile things, or at least pretending to be, who expected men to shield them from the grit of life. Clara attacked the work with a grim efficiency. She held the posts steady while he hammered. She twisted the wire with gloved hands, not flinching when a barb caught her sleeve. But the nights were the hardest. Elias was determined to be good. In his mind, goodness meant distance. It meant apology. He slept on the floor, curled up like a dog. Despite Clara's insistence that the bed was wide enough, he said excuse me when he passed her in the narrow kitchen. He averted his eyes when she unbraided her hair. It was driving Clara mad. One evening, after a dinner of beans and cornbread, the tension snapped. Elias was on his knees, arranging his bedding on the rough planks. "Get up, Elias," Clara said. He froze, a blanket clutched to his chest. He looked up at her, eyes wide. "Ma'am?" "Do not call me ma'am," she said, her voice sharp. "And do not sleep on the floor. You are the husband. This is your house. When you act like a servant in your own home, it makes me nervous." Elias sat back on his heels. "I am only trying to be respectful. Clara, I gave you my word. Respect is not the same as fear," she countered. She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands in her lap. "When you tiptoe around me, when you jump if I drop a spoon, it makes me feel like I am a bomb that is about to explode. I am not fragile, and I am not going to break if you sleep on a mattress." Elias looked at the floor, then at the bed. The distance between them felt like miles, but the floor was hard and the draft was cruel. I do not want you to think I am encroaching," he mumbled. Clara sighed. It was a sound of exhaustion, not irritation. "We are partners. Elias, we are trying to keep this place standing. We cannot do that if you are stiff with terror every time you look at me. Sleep in the bed, stay on your side. I will stay on mine." Elias slowly stood up. He folded the buffalo robe and placed it at the foot of the bed. "All right," he said. That night, they lay with 2 feet of space between them. But for the first time, Elias felt the warmth of another human being radiating across the dark. It was a comfort he had not known he was starving for. The intimacy grew not from grand gestures, but from the quiet, unavoidable friction of living. It happened when the stove handle broke, searing Elias's palm. He had hissed in pain, dropping the heavy iron lid before he could retreat to nurse it alone. Clara was there. She did not ask permission. She took his hand in hers, her fingers cool and firm, and led him to the basin. She packed snow from the windowsill against the angry red welt. She dried his hand with a cloth, her touch methodical but gentle. Elias watched the top of her head, the way a stray lock of wheat-colored hair fell over her brow. He realized, with a jolt, that no one had touched him with the specific intent of healing since he was a small boy. It happened when Elias came in from the barn to find Clara struggling to mend one of his work shirts. The fabric was thick canvas, and the needle was stuck. She was frowning, biting her lip in concentration. "Here, let me," Elias had said, forgetting to be shy. He took the shirt. "You have to twist it as you push." He showed her, his large hands surprisingly deft. They sat close by the lamp, heads bent together over the mending. And it happened on a Tuesday, when the mule, old Silas, decided he would not pull the wagon. He simply sat down in the mud of the yard and refused to acknowledge the universe. Elias pushed. He pulled. He pleaded. He threatened the mule with glue factories and predator bait. Old Silas chewed a mouthful of dry grass and blinked. Elias threw his hat in the mud and let out a groan of pure frustration. From the porch, a sound erupted. It was a rusty, creaking sound, like a gate opening after years of disuse. Elias turned. Clara was laughing. She had a hand over her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. It wasn't a polite titter. It was a real, belly-deep laugh at the absurdity of the man and the mule. Elias looked at the mule, then at his hat in the mud, and he felt a bubble rise in his own throat. He started to chuckle. The chuckle turned into a laugh. Soon, they were both standing in the cold wind, laughing until their sides ached. The grim silence of the homestead shattered by the ridiculousness of it all. It was the first time Elias had seen her eyes light up. They weren't cold anymore. They were blue, just blue. But the town was a different matter. They rode into Blackwood on a Saturday for flour and coffee. The reception was as cold as the wind. As they walked down the boardwalk, Elias felt the eyes on them. He held his arm out for Clara, stiffly. She took it, her grip tight. They passed the church. The Reverend Caldwell was standing on the steps, shaking hands with the parishioners. He was a tall, gaunt man who preached a gospel of fire and very little grace. When he saw Elias and Clara, his smile vanished. "Mr. Thorne," the Reverend said. His voice carried, "Reverend." Elias nodded, trying to keep moving. "We missed you at service last Sunday," Caldwell said, "though perhaps it is best. One must have a clean house before one invites the Lord in. There is much repenting to be done in this world, especially for those who buy their salvation, or their company, from a catalog." The women standing near the Reverend turned their backs in unison. It was a choreographed wall of bonnets and wool shawls. Elias felt Clara flinch. He stopped walking. A sudden, rare heat flared in his chest. "My wife is a Christian woman, Reverend," Elias said, his voice trembling but audible, "and my house is clean." Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "The Lord knows the heart. Mr. Thorne, and the history?" Elias hurried Clara away, his face burning. They went to the mercantile, where the clerk took their order in silence, slamming the tins of coffee on the counter with unnecessary force. By the time they reached the wagon, Elias was shaking. He helped Clara up, then climbed in beside her. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. Clara," she looked straight ahead, "it is not your fault they are small men." That night, the wind howled louder than usual. The fire was dying down, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Clara sat in the rocking chair, staring into the embers. Elias was oiling his boots by the door. "Elias," she said. He looked up. "Yes? Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why are you like this?" She gestured to him. "You are strong enough to build this house. You work until your hands bleed, but you act as if you have no right to take up space. And you say you are a virgin. It is not just religion. I know religious men. They are usually the cruelest of all." Elias set the boot down. He wiped his hands on a rag, taking a long time to answer. "It is not religion," he admitted softly. "Not mostly." He looked at the fire. "My father, he was a hard man. Not to me, mostly, but to my mother. He believed that being a man meant taking what you wanted. He used to say that the land and the woman were the same. You broke them both until they yielded." Elias swallowed the lump in his throat. "I saw things. I saw how she shrank. I saw how she stopped singing. And then I worked the cattle drives when I was 18. I saw what the men did in the towns, the way they grabbed, the way they laughed when a woman said no. They thought it was funny. They thought it was their right." He looked at Clara, his eyes wet. "I decided then I would rather be alone. I would rather be mocked for being soft than ever be the reason a woman looked at me with fear. I never wanted to be a thief of someone else's peace. So I just stayed away. And then I started to think maybe there was something wrong with me, that maybe I wasn't a man at all." The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. Clara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the blackness. "I was 16, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the emotion Elias had shown. Elias went still. "It was not a catalog," she said. "It was a debt. My father owed money to a man in St. Louis. He died before he could pay it. The man, he came to collect. He said I could work it off. He called it a job." She traced a crack in the glass with her finger. "It wasn't a job. It was ownership. I was in a house with other girls. We were not allowed to leave. The town knew. The police knew. They blamed us. They said we were fallen. They said we chose it." She turned to face Elias. "You are afraid of taking. Elias, I'm afraid of being erased. Every time a man touched me, I became less real. I became just a thing, a piece of furniture." She took a breath, and her voice shook for the first time. "I came here because I wanted to be a person again, even if it was just to be a wife on paper." Elias stood up. He wanted to cross the room. He wanted to destroy the man in St. Louis. But he stayed where he was. You are real. Clara, he said fiercely, you are the realest thing in this whole damn territory. The change happened 2 nights later. The air in the cabin had shifted. The confession had drained the poison of secrecy. They moved around each other with a new awareness. They were in bed. The lamp was out. The darkness was absolute. Elias lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to Clara's breathing. It was uneven. She was awake. Elias? Yes, Clara. Her voice was small, coming from the darkness. Can I ask you something? Anything? I want to try, she whispered. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. Try what? I want to know if it can be different, she said. I want to know if I can be touched without disappearing. Elias turned his head on the pillow. Clara, I don't know what to do. I told you, I know, she said. That is why I am asking. If you knew, you would have a way, you would have a method. I want to guide you. The rustle of the quilt. Elias felt the mattress shift as she moved closer. The heat of her body was a shock. Give me your hand, she said. Elias lifted his hand, his fingers trembling. He felt her hand find his in the dark. She guided it. She placed his palm against the side of her waist, over her nightgown. Just there, she whispered. Just hold. Do not grab. Just hold. Elias held his breath. He could feel the curve of her hip, the warmth of her skin through the cotton. He focused everything he had on being gentle, on being a wall that she could lean against, not a cage. Is this all right? He croaked. Yes, she breathed. Now move your hand up, slowly. If I say stop, you stop, like a statue, I swear it. He moved his hand, inches. He felt the rapid beat of her heart beneath her ribs. He was terrified, but beneath the fear was a profound, aching tenderness. He wasn't taking, he was being given. Clara's breathing hitched. She was waiting for the grab, the pinch, the pain. It didn't come. There was only the large, calloused hand of a man who was shaking more than she was. Touch my face, she whispered. Elias moved his hand to her cheek. He brushed his thumb over her cheekbone. It was wet. She was crying. Did I hurt you? He pulled back instantly. No, she gasped, catching his wrist. No, don't stop. It doesn't hurt. That is why I'm crying. She turned into his hand, pressing her face against his palm. She kissed the rough skin of his palm, a desperate, seeking gesture. Elias felt something break inside him, the shame of his inexperience, the belief that he was less than other men, shattered. He wasn't a conqueror. He was a harbor. He used his other hand to stroke her hair, clumsy but reverent. Clara, he whispered. Clara. They didn't go further that night. The act of touching and stopping was the intimacy. It was the proof. Clara wept for a long time, the grief of 5 years pouring out of her. Elias held her, wrapping his arms around her rigid frame until she softened, pulling her against his chest. He held her like she was made of holy glass. Outside, the wind battered the house, but inside, for the first time, the cold didn't reach them. The danger arrived on a Wednesday, under a sun that was bright and deceivingly warm. Elias and Clara were in town again. This time, they walked closer together. Clara's hand was tucked securely into the crook of Elias's arm. They were picking up a sack of grain at the depot. A man was standing near the ticket booth. He was not from Blackwood. He wore a suit that was too well cut for the territory, a bowler hat, and polished boots that had not walked through cow manure. He was showing a piece of paper to the station master. Elias felt Clara go rigid. She stopped dead, her fingernails digging into his forearm through his coat. What is it? Elias asked. That man, she hissed. Do not look. Just walk. To the wagon. Now. But it was too late. The stranger had turned. He had a smooth, pale face and a mustache waxed to sharp points. His eyes swept over the platform and landed on Clara. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who has found a misplaced coin. Miss Vance, the man called out, his voice oily and loud. Excuse me, I believe it is Mrs. Thorne now? Clara began to tremble. Elias stepped in front of her, blocking her from the man's view. Who are you? Elias asked, his voice deeper than usual. The stranger walked over, tipping his hat. No need for hostility. Friend, I am merely an associate of a mutual acquaintance, Mr. Silas P. Dalton of St. Louis. He has been very worried about his employee. He is not her employer, Elias said. She is my wife. The stranger chuckled. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. A contract, my good man. Debts are debts. Marriage does not erase a signature, Mr. Dalton wants what is his, or, at least, he wants the value of it. A small crowd had gathered. Jeb and the usual idlers were watching, grinning. Looks like Eli bought himself stolen goods, Jeb shouted. The laughter rippled through the onlookers. The shame burned Elias's face. But then he felt Clara shaking behind him. He remembered her weeping in his arms. He remembered the scars she carried. Elias did not look down. He did not stutter. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the stranger. He was 3 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier from hauling timber. She is not goods, Elias said. The words came out hard, like stones. She is Mrs. Clara Thorne. She is a citizen of this territory. And if you are Mr. Dalton, come near my land. I will treat you like any other coyote that threatens my stock. The stranger's smile faltered. He looked at Elias's hands, big, scarred hands that were clenched into fists. Is that a threat? The stranger asked softly. It is a promise, Elias said. He turned, grabbed Clara's hand, not her arm, her hand, and led her through the crowd. He walked with his head up. He stared directly at Jeb until the ranch hand looked away. He stared at the Reverend until the man pursed his lips and retreated. They climbed into the wagon. Elias whipped the reins, and they tore out of town, leaving the dust swirling in the air. But as the town faded behind them, the adrenaline faded too, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. Clara gripped his knee. He knows, she whispered. He knows where we are. Elias looked at the horizon. The clouds were building again, dark and violent. I know, he said. We cannot just hide. Elias, he has the law, or money that buys the law. Elias looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the steel. Then we don't hide, he said. We get ready. He took her hand and squeezed it. The love he felt for her was sudden and terrifying. It was a fierce, protective thing that made him want to burn the world down to keep her safe. But as the first flakes of snow began to fall, drifting across the brown grass, Elias knew that love alone would not stop what was coming. The West did not care about love. It only respected survival. We have a lot of work to do. Clara, yes, she said. Yes, we do. The snow began to fall harder, blurring the road ahead, as the wagon creaked onward into the storm. Winter descended on the Wyoming Territory, not as a season, but as a siege. The sky turned a flat, bruised gray, and lowered itself until it seemed to scrape the tops of the hills. The wind, which had been a constant companion in autumn, sharpened its teeth, carrying ice crystals that scoured the wood of the cabin and the skin of anyone foolish enough to expose it. For Elias and Clara, the world shrank to the radius of the heat thrown by the cast-iron stove. The creek froze solid 3 days before Christmas. Elias spent his mornings swinging a pickaxe at the ice, shattering the surface so the 3 horses and the milk cow, a moody Guernsey named Bess, could drink. The sound of the metal striking the ice rang out like a gunshot in the silent, white emptiness. It was brutal work. The cold was a physical weight, pressing into the joints, making every movement slow and aching. But the hardship, paradoxically, dissolved the last lingering formalities between them. There was no energy left for shyness when the temperature dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Clara had changed. The pale, ghost-like woman who had stepped off the train in October was gone. In her place was a woman wearing Elias's old wool coat, cinched at the waist with a rope, her hair braided tight against the wind. She did not hide in the house. When Bess fell ill with a winter cough, It was Clara who mixed a poultice of mustard and warm lard. Spending hours in the drafty barn rubbing the animal's chest while Elias held the lantern, she learned to shoot. It began out of necessity when a coyote grew bold enough to snatch a chicken from the coop in broad daylight. Elias had grabbed the rifle, but his gloves were too thick, and he fumbled the cartridge. Clara had taken the Winchester from his hands. Her movements were not graceful, but they were decisive. She braced the stock against her shoulder, exhaled a cloud of white breath, and pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, kicking up snow 3 feet from the predator, but the coyote scrambled away. "Teach me," she had said, handing the rifle back. "I will not be helpless. Elias." So, on the rare afternoons when the wind died down, they stood behind the barn, shooting at tin cans perched on the fence posts. She had a steady eye. She did not flinch at the recoil. "You hold your breath too long," Elias told her one afternoon, his voice low. "You have to fire at the bottom of the breath, just as it leaves you." Clara lowered the rifle and looked at him. Her cheeks were stung red by the cold. "Like this?" she exhaled, a long, slow stream of vapor, and squeezed the trigger. The can spun off the post, a jagged hole through its center. Elias smiled, a slow expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes, just like that. But as the winter locked them in, Elias found himself wrestling with a new, interior storm. The proximity was maddening. They lived in one room. They breathed the same air. He watched her brush her hair by the firelight, the gold strands gleaming. He watched her hands kneading dough, strong and capable. The fear that he was not a man, that he was broken, began to recede, replaced by a terrifying, urgent desire. He wanted her. He wanted to cross the few feet of floorboards that separated them and bury his face in the crook of her neck. But the desire brought the old fear rushing back, sharper than before. He was a large man. He was clumsy. He had spent his life watching how men like Jeb and his father used their size to intimidate. He looked at his own hands, scarred and broad, and terrified himself with the thought of crushing her. She had been hurt. The fragments of the story she had told him, the debt, the house in St. Louis, the job that was slavery, hung in the air between them. If he touched her with lust, would she see him as just another owner? Would the gratitude in her eyes turn back to that dead, flat look she had worn at the station? One evening in late January, the tension broke, not with violence, but with water. They had spent the day hauling firewood from the grove down by the creek. They were both frozen through, their bones aching with a deep chill that settles in the marrow. Elias filled the large copper tub in front of the stove. It took an hour of heating water in kettles to fill it. Steam rose in the small room, smelling of sage and lye soap. "You go first," Elias said, turning his back to give her privacy. "The water will not stay hot for long." He sat at the table, repairing a bridle, studiously keeping his eyes on the leather. He heard the rustle of her clothes, the splash as she stepped into the water, the long sigh of relief. The sound of the water lapping against the copper tub was the loudest thing in the world. "Elias?" He froze. "Yes, Clara. My back," she said softly. "The cold has settled in my shoulders. I cannot reach." Elias put down the bridle. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stood up and walked to the tub. Clara was submerged to her chest, her knees drawn up. Her skin was flushed pink from the heat. She leaned forward, resting her forehead on her knees, exposing the long, elegant line of her spine. Elias picked up the cloth and the soap. His hands shook. He lathered the cloth, the scent of lavender, a luxury she had bought with her egg money, filling his nose. He touched the cloth to her shoulder blade. She did not flinch. She leaned into the pressure. "Is that too hard?" he whispered. "No," she murmured. "Harder. There is a knot. Just there." Elias worked the knot with his thumb, discarding the cloth, skin on skin. Her skin was soft, incredibly soft, a stark contrast to the rough calluses of his thumb. He traced the line of her spine, the curve of her shoulder. He was awed by the geometry of her, the living warmth. He was learning her. He learned that she held her tension at the base of her neck. He learned that she shivered not from cold, but from sensation when he brushed the hair away from her nape. Clara turned her head, resting her cheek on her knee so she could look at him. Her eyes were dark, dilated in the dim light. "You are shaking." "Elias, I am afraid," he admitted, his voice rough. "Of what?" "Of hurting you. Of being too much. I am a big man." "Clara, I do not know the gentle way." Clara reached out a wet hand and took his wrist. She pulled his hand from her back and brought it to her lips. She kissed his knuckles, one by one. "You are the gentlest man I have ever known," she whispered. "And I am not made of glass. I am made of gristle and bone, just like you." She turned fully in the tub, the water sloshing. She reached up and placed her hands on his face, pulling him down. "Kiss me," she said, "not like a friend. Kiss me like you want to." Elias made a sound low in his throat. He leaned down. He did not grab. He did not devour. He pressed his mouth to hers with a desperate, trembling reverence. Her lips parted. She tasted of peppermint tea and hope. It was not perfect. Their noses bumped. Elias didn't know where to put his hands, hovering them in the air until Clara took them and placed them on her wet shoulders. But when she sighed into his mouth, a sound of pure want. The dam inside Elias broke. He kissed her deeply, exploring the shape of her mouth, the texture of her tongue. He felt her hands tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. For the first time in his life, he felt the immense power of his own body, not as a threat, but as an instrument of connection. When he pulled back, gasping, they were both flushed. "The water is getting cold," Elias whispered. Clara smiled, a true, wicked smile that transformed her face. "Then you had better help me out." They did not make love that night. The leap from solitude to union was too vast to cross in a single stride. But later, in the bed, there was no space between them. Elias held her against his chest, her back to his front, his arm draped heavily over her waist. Her hand rested on his forearm, their fingers interlaced. "Can you make me come?" she whispered into the dark, echoing the question she had asked months ago. Elias buried his face in her hair. "I am going to spend the rest of my life learning how—" "Clara, I promise you that." The thaw came in March, turning the world into a slush of mud and half-melted drifts. With the thaw came the realization that they had survived the winter, but the supplies were dangerously low. The flour barrel was empty. The coffee was gone. They hitched the wagon, the wheels sinking deep into the muck, and made the slow, arduous journey to Blackwood. The town had changed over the winter. There were new fences up on the outskirts. A new sign hung over the bank, Kincaid Cattle Land Company. Elias felt a prickle of unease on the back of his neck. They went to the general store first. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, looked nervous. He weighed their flour and sugar quickly, his eyes darting to the door. "You folks best be careful," Henderson muttered as he wrapped the bacon. "Why is that?" "Mr. Henderson?" Elias asked, counting out the coins. "Cyrus Kincaid is in town," Henderson said, lowering his voice. "Bought out the livery and the freight office over the winter. He's buying up everything. Says the small claims are inefficient. Says he needs the water access for his herds." Elias stiffened. "My claim has the only year-round creek in the South Valley?" Henderson nodded grimly. "I know. Elias. And so does he." Clara was standing by the fabric bolts, looking at a spool of blue ribbon. She had not heard the conversation. The bell above the door jingled. The air in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. A man walked in. He was older, perhaps 50, with a shock of silver hair and a coat made of fine buffalo hide. He did not look like a cowboy. He looked like a senator. He was flanked by 2 men. One was the stranger from the train station, the one Elias had confronted in the fall, Cyrus Kincaid. He walked with the heavy, assured tread of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. He stopped in the center of the store, looking around with a proprietary air. "Henderson," he boomed. "I need 3 boxes of Havana cigars, and put it on my ledger." "Yes, Mr. Kincaid," Henderson squeaked. Kincaid turned his gaze and saw Elias. He smiled, a tightening of thin lips that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Thorn, I presume. I have heard much about you, the man who sits on the Sweetwater Creek. Elias stepped away from the counter, placing himself between Kincaid and Clara. Mr. Kincaid, I sent a man to see you last week, but the roads were impassable. Kincaid said smoothly, I have a proposition for you. I am expanding. I am willing to offer you a fair price for your claim. $600. It is worth $2,000, Elias said steadily. And it is not for sale. Kincaid chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. Everything is for sale. Son, it is just a matter of finding the right currency. His eyes drifted past Elias and landed on Clara. She was frozen. Her hand was hovering over the blue ribbon. She was looking at the man beside Kincaid, the stranger with the waxed mustache. Ah, Kincaid said, his voice dropping to a purr. And this must be the bride. The, import. He took a step toward her. The stranger whispered something in Kincaid's ear. Kincaid's eyebrows rose. Is that so? He said. Well, it seems we have mutual acquaintances in St. Louis. A Mr. Dalton speaks highly of your talents. Clara did not move. Her face had gone white, the blood draining away so fast she looked like a corpse. Her eyes glazed over. She was not in the general store anymore. She was back in the parlor with the velvet curtains, the smell of stale cigar smoke, the heavy hand of a man who owned her. Dissociation. It hit her like a physical blow. The sounds of the store, the rustle of paper, the wind outside, faded into a buzzing static. Kincaid reached out. He did not grab her. He reached out and brushed a piece of lint from her shoulder. A proprietary gesture. A test. You know, Mrs. Thorn, Kincaid said softly. There are unresolved ledgers. A woman who runs away with company property. That is a serious matter. The touch snapped her back. The feeling of his gloved hand on her shoulder was the spark in the powder keg. The freezing cold of the dissociation shattered into a white-hot rage. Clara did not scream. She did not cry. Her hand moved. It was a blur. She snatched a pair of fabric shears from the counter. With a guttural sound, half sob and half snarl, she swung the heavy shears. They slammed into the wooden counter, inches from Kincaid's hand, burying the points deep in the oak. The sound was like a thunderclap in the small room. Kincaid jerked back, his composure cracking. Do not touch me, Clara said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was low, guttural, vibrating with a feral menace. I am not property. I am not a ledger. If you touch me again, I will not miss. The stranger with the mustache reached for his gun belt. Elias was there. He moved faster than he had ever moved in his life. He grabbed the stranger's wrist, twisting it with the strength of a man who wrestled steers for a living. The stranger cried out, dropping to one knee. We are leaving, Elias said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were burning. He grabbed the sack of flour with one hand and took Clara's arm with the other. Come, Clara. They backed out of the store. Kincaid stood by the counter, staring at the shears vibrating in the wood. He was not scared. He looked interested. You have spirit, Kincaid called out. I enjoy breaking spirits. It makes the horse more valuable. They did not go straight to the wagon. Elias pulled Clara into the alleyway between the bank and the assay office. She was shaking violently now, the adrenaline crashing. He held her shoulders. Clara, look at me. She looked up, her eyes wide and wild. He knows Dalton. They are going to take me back. No, Elias said firmly. No one is taking you anywhere. But the law here is Kincaid, Elias said bitterly. The sheriff drinks at Kincaid's saloon. The judge plays poker at Kincaid's table. We have to run, Clara whispered. We have to go to Oregon, or California, and leave the land. The house? Elias shook his head. No, that is what he wants. He wants us to run so he can take the water. If we run, we admit guilt. If we run, they will hunt us down as criminals. Then what do we do? She cried. We fight, Elias said, but not with guns. Not yet. He looked down the street. There was a small, dusty office above the feed store. A sign swung in the wind. Thaddeus Holt, attorney at law, notary public. Holt was a new arrival, a man who had come west for his health. consumption. The rumors said he was known for being drunk by noon and reading Greek philosophy on his porch, but he was not on Kincaid's payroll. Not yet. Come, Elias said. They found Thaddeus Holt asleep at his desk, a bottle of whiskey half empty beside a stack of law books. He was a scarecrow of a man, with a hacking cough and ink-stained fingers. Elias slammed his hand on the desk. Wake up, Mr. Holt. We have business. Holt jerked awake, blinking bleary eyes. He adjusted his spectacles. Elias Thorne, and the mysterious Mrs. Thorne. To what do I owe the pleasure of this intrusion? They told him everything. Clara spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing strength. She told him about the debt her father left, the contract she had been forced to sign, the nature of the work, the flight. Holt listened, his cynicism fading as the story unfolded. He poured a small glass of whiskey, but did not drink it. He turned the glass in his fingers, watching the amber liquid catch the light. And this Kincaid, Holt rasped, coughing into a handkerchief. He claims to represent this Dalton. He implies it, Elias said. He says there is a debt. Holt stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where Kincaid was crossing toward the bank. This is not about the debt, Holt said. It is about the creek. Kincaid is overgrazing the north pasture. He needs water or his empire dies of thirst next summer. He is using your wife's past as a bludgeon to steal your future. Can he do it? Clara asked. Can he take me back? Holt turned. Under the law? It is murky. Indentured contracts are largely illegal since the war. But debt repayment is a slippery slope. If they have a judge who interprets the contract as a valid labor agreement, they could issue a warrant for your arrest for theft of services. He paused, a glint of steel entering his watery eyes. However, if the original contract was signed under duress, or if the nature of the work violates the moral statutes of the territory, then the contract is void. He looked at Clara. You say they made you sign it after your father died. Did you have legal counsel? No, Clara said. I was 16. Holt slammed his hand on a book. Fraud. Coercion of a minor. And if we can prove Kincaid is colluding to enforce an illegal contract for the purpose of land extortion, we have him on conspiracy. We need evidence, Elias said. We need the contract, Holt corrected. The one they are holding over you. And we need to file a preemptive claim on your water rights that ties them up in federal court, not the local county court Kincaid owns. He sat down and pulled a fresh sheet of paper. It will cost you. I don't work for free. I have $40. Elias said. Holt waved a hand. Keep your money. I want a side of beef when you slaughter in the fall. And he smiled. A crooked, dangerous thing. I want to see the look on Cyrus Kincaid's face when I serve him a federal injunction. I detest bullies. Mr. Thorne. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of soldiers moving into position. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Elias unhitched the team while Clara lit the stove. When he came inside, she was standing by the table, her hands resting on the smooth wood. Elias went to her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. We are in it now, he said. Yes, she answered. She leaned back against him. Elias? Yes, in the store. When I grabbed the shears, did I scare you? Elias turned her around. He looked into her face. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. No, he said honestly. You looked like a warrior. I was proud. Clara let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. She reached up and touched his face. I am not going back. Elias, I will die before I go back to that life. You won't die, Elias said, and you won't go back. This is our land. You are my wife, and I will kill any man who tries to break that. It was a vow. It was quiet, spoken in a kitchen that smelled of cold ash and dust, but it was as binding as any granite monument. They ate a simple supper of bread and the last of the preserves. They went to bed early, exhausted by the day. In the darkness, the intimacy was fierce. There was a desperation to their touching, a need to reaffirm that they were real, that they were here, that they belonged to each other. Elias kissed the hollow of her throat. He felt her pulse beating strong and steady. "I love you, Clara," he whispered. The words felt strange in his mouth, heavy and new. "I love you, Elias," she whispered back. They fell asleep tangled together, limbs heavy with exhaustion. They were woken 3 hours later by a sound that cut through their dreams. Crack! It was the sharp, distinctive sound of a rifle shot. Elias was out of bed before the echo faded. He grabbed his trousers and his Winchester. Moving low to the floor, "Stay down," he hissed to Clara. He crawled to the window and peered out through a crack in the shutter. The moon was high and bright. In the silvery light, he could see the south pasture. The fence line was cut. The wire was coiled back like a snake, and hanging from the gatepost, swinging gently in the wind, was a shape. Elias squinted. It wasn't a man. It was Bess, the milk cow. She was dead, her throat cut, her body strung up as a grotesque warning. On the side of the barn, painted in jagged letters with something dark that looked like tar, was a message. "Pay the debt or lose the land." Elias gripped the rifle until his knuckles turned white. He felt a cold, deadly calm settle over him. The time for being soft was over. He turned to Clara, who was crouching by the bed, her eyes wide in the moonlight. "What is it?" she whispered. "It has started," Elias said. He looked back out at the dark hills. Somewhere out there, Kincaid's men were watching. Let them watch, Elias thought. He cocked the lever of the Winchester. Let them come. The Wyoming spring was a liar. It had teased them with melting drifts and mud in March, only to turn around in April and deliver a blizzard that buried the world in white silence. The wind returned with a vengeance, screaming down from the north, piling snow against the cabin walls until the windows were halfway covered in drifts. Elias and Clara were trapped. The cabin, once a place of tentative domesticity, transformed into a fortress. The air inside grew stale, thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp wool, and anxiety. The warning painted on the barn, "Pay the debt or lose the land," was now hidden beneath a layer of ice. But the words were burned into their minds. For Clara, the confinement was a physical torment. The walls seemed to inch closer every day. The wind howling in the chimney sounded too much like the voices of men arguing in the parlor of the house in St. Louis. She began to wake in the night, gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. One night, Elias woke to the sound of a whimper. He sat up, the buffalo robe sliding off his chest. The fire had died down to embers, casting a dull, red glow across the room. Clara was sitting up in bed, her knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. "Clara," Elias whispered. She flinched violently, scrambling back against the headboard. "Don't!" she gasped. "I will be good. I promise. Just don't!" Elias froze. It was not his name she was answering. She was talking to a ghost. He did not reach for her. He knew by now that touch, in these moments, was a threat. Instead, he sat quietly on the edge of the mattress, making himself small. "It is Elias," he said softly. "It is just Elias. You are in Wyoming. The door is barred." Clara blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dark. The terror slowly drained from her face, replaced by a hollow, crushing exhaustion. She slumped against the pillows. "I thought," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I thought I heard boots in the hall." "There is no hall, Clara, just this room, and the wind." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "How long can you do this? Elias, do what? Guard me. Keep the ghosts out." She gestured to the snow-covered window. "They are waiting. The winter will end, and they will come. You are tired. I see it in your eyes. Eventually, you will hate me for the trouble I bring." Elias looked down at his hands. They were rough, the knuckles swollen from the cold. He felt a flash of anger, not at her, but at the world that had broken her so thoroughly that she viewed his care as a finite resource, a loan that would eventually be called in. "I do not hate you," he said, "and I am not tired of you. I am tired of them." He stood up and walked to the corner where his Winchester leaned against the wall. He picked it up, checking the lever action for the 100th time that day. The metal was cold and heavy. He had always been a gentleman. He had prided himself on it. But now, looking at the woman shivering in the bed, he felt a dark, cold thing uncoiling in his gut. He realized with a sick certainty that if Kincaid walked through the door, Elias would not just stop him, he would destroy him. The line between protection and savagery was blurring, and it terrified him. "I will not let them touch you," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Flat, dangerous. Clara watched him, and for the first time, she did not look reassured. She looked afraid, not of the men outside, but of what the fight was doing to the man inside. The storm broke on a Tuesday, leaving the sky a brilliant, blinding blue. The drifts were 4 feet deep. Elias was in the barn, trying to salvage the last of the hay for the horses. When he heard the jingle of a harness, he moved to the door, the pitchfork tight in his hand. It was Sheriff Grady. He was riding a large bay gelding, flanked by 2 deputies who looked more like hired thugs than peace officers. They struggled through the deep snow, their horses blowing hard. Elias stepped out of the barn. He did not wave. He did not smile. "Sheriff," Elias said, "you are far from town." Grady pulled up, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the pristine snow. He was a thick-set man with a face like a slab of cured ham, red and weathered. He avoided Elias's eyes, looking instead at the horizon. "Elias, bad time of year for a ride." "That is a fact. What do you want?" "Grady?" The sheriff sighed, reaching into his heavy coat. He pulled out a folded paper. "Official business. Son. Writ of attachment." Elias did not move to take it. "What does that mean?" "Means there is a dispute regarding the title of this land and the assets residing upon it." Grady leaned forward, his saddle creaking. "Judge Holloway signed it this morning. Seems Mr. Kincaid has filed a petition claiming that the purchase of your wife's contract constitutes a lien against your property. Until the hearing, you are not to sell any stock, move any timber, or leave the county." "That is a lie," Elias said, his voice shaking with rage. "The contract is illegal. Thaddeus Holt is filing an injunction." Grady chuckled darkly. "Holt is a drunk. Elias." "And Judge Holloway does not read filings from drunks. He listens to men who pay their taxes. And men who own half the valley?" He tossed the paper. It fluttered in the wind and landed in the snow at Elias's feet. "Listen to me." "Elias," Grady said, his tone shifting to a mock paternal wheedle. "You are a good boy. You work hard. You don't want this war, Kincaid. He eats men like you for breakfast?" He nodded toward the cabin. "She is just a woman, a mail-order girl with a spotted past. Is she worth your land? Is she worth your life? Just send her back. Kincaid says if you hand her over, the debt is cleared. He will even give you $500 for your trouble. You can start fresh. Find a nice, clean girl from the church." Elias stepped forward. The snow crunched loudly under his boots. He gripped the pitchfork until the wood groaned. "Get off my land, Grady." Grady stiffened. His hand drifted toward his holster. "You threatening an officer of the law?" "I am telling a trespasser to leave," Elias said. "If you come back without a federal marshal, I will assume you are just another one of Kincaid's hired guns, and I will treat you accordingly." Grady stared at him for a long moment. He saw the change in Elias. The softness was gone. The boy who used to apologize for taking up space was gone. "Have it your way, kid," Grady muttered. He turned his horse. "But don't say I didn't warn you. The winter ain't over yet." Elias watched them ride away until they were specks against the white hills. When he turned back to the house, Clara was standing on the porch. She was not wearing a coat. She was shivering, her face pale as the snow. She had heard every word. "She is just a woman. Is she worth your life?" Elias walked up the steps. He dropped the pitchfork and took her by the arms, marching her inside the warm cabin. "You will catch your death," he scolded gently, but his hands were trembling. Clara pulled away from him. retreating to the center of the room. She looked at him with a frantic, wild expression. $500, she said. That is a fortune. Elias, you could buy the neighboring claim. You could build a new barn. Stop it, Elias said. He is right, she cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. I am not worth it. I am a millstone around your neck. I am the reason they killed Bess. I am the reason you cannot sleep. I am a curse. Elias! She grabbed a plate from the table, a tin plate, and threw it. It clattered uselessly against the wall. Give me back, she screamed. Give me back to them and save yourself. Elias closed the distance in 2 strides. He did not grab her in anger. He grabbed her to stop her from shattering. He wrapped his arms around her, pinning her arms to her sides as she fought him. No, he shouted. No, she struggled, sobbing, kicking at his shins. I am poison. Let me go. I will not. Elias roared, his voice cracking. He held her tighter, burying his face in her hair. You are not poison. You are my wife. You are the only good thing I have ever had. The fight went out of her all at once. She collapsed against him, her legs giving way. Elias sank to the floor with her, holding her as she wept, great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. He rocked her, whispering meaningless things into her hair. I am here. I am here. I am not letting go. Outside. The wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. Inside. The fire popped. After a long time. Clara pulled back. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the fear and the love warring in his face. Elias, she whispered. Yes, I don't want to be a debt. I don't want to be a cause you are fighting for. What do you want to be? I want to be yours, she said. But not because you own me. I want you to want me. Not to save me, just to want me. Elias reached up and cupped her face. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. I have wanted you since the moment you stepped off that train, he said. I have wanted you so much I thought it was a sin. Show me, she whispered. The request hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Elias hesitated. I don't know how to do this perfectly. Clara, I am clumsy. I don't want perfect, she said fiercely. I want real. I want to choose this. I choose you. Elias. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a tentative kiss. It was hungry, desperate, acclaiming. Elias kissed her back. The fear of hurting her vanished, replaced by a profound need to be close, to merge their 2 broken lives into something whole. They moved to the bed. The room was cold, but under the heavy quilts. It was a separate world. For Clara, it was a terrifying threshold. Every touch she had known before had been theft. But Elias asked, Can I touch you here? He whispered, his hand hovering over her waist. Yes, she breathed. He moved slowly. He let her set the pace. When she tensed, he stopped, waiting until she exhaled and pulled him closer. He learned the map of her body not as a conqueror, but as a traveler grateful for the shelter. And for Elias, it was a revelation. He realized that the act was not about taking. It was about giving. It was a conversation without words. When the moment finally came, it was not a thunderclap. It was a quiet, shuddering release, a moment of absolute vulnerability shared in the dark. Clara cried out softly, gripping his shoulders, and Elias felt a rush of emotion so intense it burned his eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin against skin. The buffalo robe pulled high over their heads. Was it all right? Elias asked into the silence. Clara turned her head and kissed his shoulder. It was not a violent thing. She whispered, It was kind. You are kind, Elias. He tightened his arm around her. It was enough. For tonight, it was enough. 2 days later, the tragedy arrived with the smell of smoke. It was late afternoon. The sun was setting in a bloody haze. Elias was inside, mending a stirrup leather. Clara was at the stove, making biscuits. Elias sniffed the air. He frowned. Clara, did you burn the flour? No, she said, turning. Then what? Elias stood up. He walked to the window. Fire. It was not the house. It was the hayshed. the separate structure where they kept the winter feed for the horses and the remaining livestock. "No!" Elias shouted. He grabbed his coat and ran out the door. The shed was fully engulfed. The dry hay, even in the cold, went up like gunpowder. Orange flames licked at the sky, casting a grotesque, dancing light on the snow. Elias ran toward it, grabbing a shovel, throwing snow uselessly at the inferno. The horses in the adjacent barn were screaming, kicking at their stalls. "Get the horses!" Clara screamed from the porch. Elias abandoned the shed. He ran into the barn. The heat was intense. Smoke billowed in the rafters. He threw open the stall doors, slapping the rumps of the terrified animals, driving them out into the snow-covered paddock. He managed to get all 3 horses out. He dragged the tack trunk into the snow, but the hay was gone. All of it. Elias stood in the snow, his face blackened with soot, watching the structure collapse into a pile of glowing embers. Without feed, the horses would starve before the grass came in. Without the horses, they could not work the land. It was a death sentence, delivered with a match. He felt a hand on his arm. It was Clara. She was staring at the fire, her face devoid of expression. "They did this," she said. Elias nodded grimly. "Grady warned me. He said the winter wasn't over." He looked at the tracks in the snow leading away from the back of the shed. 2 riders. They had come in from the north ridge, lit the fire, and vanished. "We have to move the horses to the south pasture," Elias said, his voice dull. "There is some dry scrub there under the snow. It might keep them alive for a week." He turned to look at her. "Go inside. Clara, make coffee. I will be in soon." He spent the next 2 hours securing the horses and beating out the last of the sparks to ensure the wind didn't carry them to the house. When he finally walked back to the cabin, his legs felt like lead. The cabin was dark. "Clara," he called out. Silence. He lit the lamp with shaking hands. The fire in the stove was dying. The biscuits were cold on the counter. The room was empty. Elias spun around. Her coat was gone. Her boots were gone. On the table, weighted down by the salt shaker, was a piece of paper. Elias picked it up. His hands were so numb he could barely hold it. "My dearest Elias, the fire was for me. The cow was for me. Next time, it will be the house, and you will be inside it. I cannot let you die for a mistake I made 6 years ago. I am going to town. I will go to Kincaid. I will tell him I ran away and that you knew nothing. I will tell him I forced you. He will take me back, and he will leave you alone. Do not come for me. Please, if you love me, let me save you. I love you. You made me real." Clara Elias stared at the paper. The words swam before his eyes. A sound ripped from his throat, a roar of pure animal panic. She was walking, in the snow, at night, to surrender herself to a monster. He did not think. He did not plan. He grabbed his coat. He grabbed the rifle. He ran out to the paddock. He didn't bother with a saddle. He threw a bridle on the bay mare, vaulted onto her bare back, and kicked her into a gallop. The night was freezing. The wind cut through his clothes like knives. Elias bent low over the mare's neck, squinting against the stinging ice crystals. He found her tracks. They were small, deep holes in the snow, heading east toward the road to Blackwood. She had a 2-hour head start, but the snow was deep, and she was on foot. Elias rode like a madman. He pushed the mare hard, risking a broken leg in the drifts. "Come on, girl," he whispered. "Come on." He found her near the creek bed, 3 miles from the homestead. She had collapsed. The cold had taken her legs. She was crawling, dragging herself through the snow, her movements slow and dreamlike. "Clara!" Elias screamed. He slid off the horse before it fully stopped. He ran to her, falling into the snow beside her. She looked up. Her skin was blue-white. Her eyelashes were frosted with ice. She looked at him with a confused, drunken gaze. "Hypothermia." "Go back," she mumbled, her teeth chattering so hard the words were slurred. "Go back, Elias." He gathered her into his arms. She felt like a block of ice. "You stupid, stubborn woman," he sobbed, pulling her against his chest, trying to transfer his heat to her. "You think this is saving me? You think I can live without you? I have to pay the debt," she whispered. "There is no debt." Elias shouted into the wind. He ripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, ignoring the biting cold that immediately attacked his shirt sleeves. He lifted her. She was dead weight. "I need you," he yelled, his voice breaking. "I don't need the land. I don't need the cows. I need you. You are my heart. Clara, if you go, I am dead anyway." He managed to heave her onto the horse. He climbed up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, sandwiching her between his body and the horse's warm neck. "Stay awake, Clara," he commanded. "Talk to me. Tell me about the blue ribbon. Tell me anything. Blue ribbon." She mumbled, "Pretty." He turned the horse back toward the cabin. The ride back was a blur of terror. Every time her head lolled forward, Elias shook her, shouting her name. They made it back. Elias carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the wind. He laid her on the rug in front of the stove. He threw every piece of wood he had into the firebox until the cast iron glowed red. He stripped the frozen clothes off her. He stripped off his own clothes. He pulled the mattress off the bed and dragged it to the fire. He wrapped them both in every quilt they owned. He held her, skin to skin, shivering violently as the cold slowly leached out of her and into him. He rubbed her arms, her legs, her back. He kissed her frozen face. "Please," he prayed. "Please, God, I will never ask for anything else. Just this." It took an hour. Slowly, the color began to return to her cheeks. She stopped shaking. Her breathing deepened. She opened her eyes. They were clear. "Elias?" she croaked. "I am here." He wept. "I am here." "Why did you come?" "Because I am selfish," he whispered, stroking her hair. "Because I cannot be the man I want to be without you." She buried her face in his chest and began to cry. Morning brought a cold, hard clarity. Elias sat at the table, cleaning his rifle. Clara was wrapped in a blanket, drinking hot water. They had no coffee. "We cannot stay here," Elias said. His voice was steady. Clara looked up. "He will burn the house next." "Yeah, so we leave? We go to Oregon?" "No," Elias said. He looked at the map he had spread out on the table. "If we run, we are fugitives. Kincaid will send men after us. He will put a bounty on you as a thief. We will never stop looking over our shoulders. Then what? We go to Cheyenne," Elias said. He pointed to a spot on the map. "It is 70 miles south. Through the pass. Cheyenne. That is where the Territorial District Court is. That is where the U.S. Marshal's office is. Judge Holloway is Kincaid's man. Sheriff Grady is Kincaid's man. But the federal judges in Cheyenne, they are not." "We take the evidence?" Clara asked. "We take everything. We take the letters Holt wrote. We take your testimony. We go to the governor if we have to. We force them to listen. It is 70 miles. "Elias," Clara said softly, "in the snow, with no feed for the horses, we can take the strongest horse. We pack light. It will take us 4 days, maybe 5. It is suicide," she said. "Staying here is suicide," Elias countered. "Staying here is waiting to be slaughtered. Out there, at least we are moving. At least we are fighting." He looked at her. "I am done hiding. Clara, I am done apologizing. I want my life back. I want our life." Clara stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the blackened ruins of the hay shed. She looked at the white expanse of the prairie. A deadly, beautiful, indifferent ocean. She turned back to him. Her jaw was set. "When do we leave?" "Now," Elias said, "before the snow starts again." They packed in silence. A bag of dried meat, the last of the flour, a pot, the rifle, the Bible. They saddled the bay mare. They turned the other 2 horses loose, hoping they would find shelter in the canyon. Elias helped Clara up into the saddle. He would walk, leading the horse, to save the animal's strength. He took one last look at the cabin, the half-finished siding, the smoke curling from the chimney. It was the only home he had ever known. He turned his back on it. "Ready?" he asked, looking up at Clara. She gripped the pommel. Her eyes were terrified, but she nodded. "Ready!" Elias took the reins. He stepped forward into the snow, breaking the trail. They headed south, into the teeth of the wind, leaving the safety of the known for a justice that might not exist. Cheyenne was not a town. It was a machine made of brick, iron and noise. To Elias and Clara, who had spent months listening to nothing but the wind and the coyotes. The territorial capital was an assault on the senses. The air smelled of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the copper tang of money changing hands. They arrived ragged, their horses gaunt, their faces burned by the wind and snow. The city bustled around them, indifferent to their survival. Men in clean linen collars stepped around them on the boardwalks, checking pocket watches and clutching leather portfolios. Locomotives screamed in the rail yard, a constant mechanical shriek that made Clara flinch with every blast. This was the seat of power in the Wyoming Territory. It was here that the future was being written in ledgers and land deeds, far from the blood and mud of the actual claims. Elias led their exhausted horse to a livery stable on the edge of town. He counted out his remaining coins with shaking fingers. He had $12 left. "We need a room," Elias said quietly, "and a bath. We cannot walk into a federal court looking like beggars." They found a boarding house near the rail yard that charged 50 cents a night. The room was small and smelled of cabbage, but the water in the basin was warm. Clara scrubbed the trail dust from her skin until she was raw. She put on her gray dress, which she had carried carefully wrapped in oilcloth. It was wrinkled, but it was clean. Elias shaved the stubble from his jaw. He brushed his coat. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror. He looked older. The softness around his mouth was gone, replaced by a thin, hard line. "Are you ready?" he asked. Clara stood by the window, watching the street below. A carriage rolled by, carrying a woman in a silk dress who laughed at something a man in a top hat said. "I am afraid," Clara admitted. "Good," Elias said. "Fear keeps you sharp." They walked to the federal courthouse. It was a massive stone building that seemed designed to make a man feel small. The hallways echoed with the click of boot heels on marble. They navigated a maze of clerks, secretaries, and bailiffs, each one a gatekeeper designed to filter out the desperate. They were finally granted an audience with an assistant United States attorney named Percival Black. He was a young man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually tired expression. Sitting behind a desk piled high with files, he looked up as they entered, his eyes sweeping over Elias's rough hands and Clara's tense posture. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," Black said, not offering a seat. "My clerk tells me you have a frantic story about land fraud and illegal contracts. I have 5 minutes. The territory is full of land disputes. What makes yours special?" "It is not a dispute," Elias said, his voice ringing in the small office. "It is a conspiracy." Clara stepped forward. She placed the documents they had salvaged, the threatening note, the affidavit Thaddeus Holt had hastily written, and her own marriage certificate, on the desk. "It is about slavery." "Mr. Black," she said. Black paused. He looked at her. "Slavery is illegal." "Madam, that is why I'm here," Clara said. She began to speak. It was the first time she had told the story from beginning to end to someone who held the power of the state. She told him about her father's debt. She told him about the man in St. Louis, a Mr. Dalton, who had forced a 16-year-old girl to sign a contract she was not allowed to read. She told him about the house with the velvet curtains, and the men who paid for time, and how the money never reduced the debt, only the interest. She spoke of her escape. She spoke of Cyrus Kincaid, and how he had recognized her, and how he was using that illegal contract to blackmail her husband for water rights. As she spoke, the room went quiet. The scratching of the clerk's pen in the corner stopped. Percival Black stopped looking at his watch. He looked at Clara. She was shaking. Her hands were gripping the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles were white. But her voice did not break. She stripped herself of every secret, refusing to use euphemisms. She forced this man in his clean collar to see the brutality that underpinned the polite commerce of the West. "I am not a rumor," Clara finished, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I am a citizen, and I am asking if the law protects me, or if it only protects men like Kincaid." Black stared at her for a long moment. He picked up the affidavit Holt had written. "Cyrus Kincaid," Black muttered. He has many friends in this town. Does he have friends in Washington? Elias asked sharply. Because that is where we will go next. Black looked at Elias. He saw the Winchester leaning against the wall by the door. He saw the look in the cowboy's eyes, a look that said he had already decided to die for this. Black sighed. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. This office takes a dim view of peonage, Mr. Thorne, and an even dimmer view of coercion, if what you say is true. And if Kincaid is enforcing a contract for prostitution to seize federal land claims, that is a felony under the Anti-Peonage Act of 1867. He dipped his pen in the inkwell. We will schedule a preliminary hearing for tomorrow morning, Black said. Judge Abernathy is presiding. He is a hard man, but he hates traffickers. Do not be late. They left the courthouse feeling lightheaded, as if the gravity had shifted. They had done it. They had started the machine, but the machine had gears that turned in both directions. Elias sent Clara back to the boarding house to rest. He needed to find a smith to look at the mare's shoe, which had come loose on the ride. He was walking past a saloon on 17th Street when a hand grasped his arm. Mr. Thorne. A word. Elias turned. It was the stranger with the waxed mustache, the man from the train station, the man from the general store. Kincaid's man. Elias tensed, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. He had left the rifle with Clara. Easy, the man said, smiling a smile that showed too many teeth. My name is Mr. Graves. Mr. Kincaid would like to buy you a drink. I'm not thirsty, Elias said. Mr. Kincaid insists. He is just inside. He thinks you are a practical man who has been put in a difficult position. Elias looked at the saloon doors. He could run, but running would show fear, and he needed to know what Kincaid was planning. Lead the way, Elias said. The saloon was dark and smelled of stale beer and expensive tobacco. Cyrus Kincaid sat at a table in the back, surrounded by red velvet chairs. He was drinking whiskey from a crystal glass. He did not stand up. Sit down, son, Kincaid said. Elias remained standing. I will stand. Suit yourself, Kincaid said. He gestured to the empty chair. You have made quite a stir. Mr. Thorne, marching into the federal attorney's office, dragging your poor wife through the mud. Do you have any idea what you are doing? I'm getting justice, Elias said. Justice. Kincaid laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. Justice is a commodity. Elias, it is like wheat. You buy it, you sell it. You are trying to pay with pebbles. Kincaid leaned forward. The jovial mask slipped, revealing the shark beneath. Look, I like you. You have grit. Most men would have folded when the cow died. I am willing to be generous. I will give you $1,000 for your claim. Cash. Today. $1,000 was more money than Elias had ever seen. It was enough to move to Oregon. It was enough to build a new life. And Clara? Elias asked. Kincaid waved a hand dismissively. She goes back to St. Louis. Mr. Dalton has a legal claim, but with $1,000, you can buy yourself a new wife, a clean one without so much baggage. Elias looked at the man. He looked at the clean suit, the manicured fingernails, the crystal glass. He thought of Clara crawling through the snow, begging him to save himself. He thought of the way she had looked in the tub, the scars on her soul that were just beginning to heal. You think you can buy her, Elias said softly. You think she is a thing. She is a thing. Kincaid said cold. She is an asset, and she is a depreciating one. Be smart. Boy, take the money. Walk away. Elias placed his hands on the table. He leaned down until his face was inches from Kincaid's. If you ever come near her again, Elias whispered, I will not sue you. I will not report you. I will open you up from your throat to your belly, and I will leave you for the crows. The silence in the back of the saloon was absolute. Mr. Graves stepped forward, his hand inside his coat. Kincaid held up a hand to stop him. He stared at Elias, his eyes narrowing. You are making a mistake, Kincaid said. A fatal one. The road home is long. Mr. Thorne. Accidents happen. I reckon they do, Elias said. He turned and walked out. He felt the eyes of the men boring into his back. He expected a bullet, but none came. Kincaid was too smart to shoot a man in a crowded city the day before a hearing. He preferred the dark. The hearing the next morning was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread. The case of the virgin cowboy and the runaway bride had caught the imagination of the bored populace. Reporters from the Cheyenne leader sat in the front row, pencils poised. Judge Abernathy sat on the bench like a gargoyle carved from granite. He was an old man with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen every form of human depravity. Mr. Black presented the case. He was dry, factual. He laid out the timeline. The debt, the contract, the coercion. Then it was Kincaid's turn. Kincaid did not speak. He had hired a lawyer from Chicago, a man named Sterling, who wore a suit that cost more than Elias's farm. Sterling did not attack the facts of the land dispute. He attacked Clara. He called her to the stand. Clara walked to the chair. She kept her head high, but Elias could see the tremor in her hands. Mrs. Thorne, Sterling began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Is it true that you worked at the Gilded Lily in St. Louis for 3 years? Yes, Clara said. And what was the nature of your employment? I was held against my will. Clara said, Come now. Sterling smiled. Did you not receive room and board? Did you not receive gifts from gentlemen? I received abuse. Clara said. Sterling turned to the gallery. This woman is a known prostitute. She fled St. Louis to avoid arrest for theft. She entrapped this naive rancher into a marriage to hide from her crimes. She is immoral. She is a liar. And now she wants the federal government to break a valid contract because she is tired of her bargain. He turned back to Clara. You are a woman of loose morals, are you not? You used your body to secure this man, just as you used it to secure money in St. Louis. Objection, Black shouted. But the damage was done. The gallery buzzed. Women whispered behind their fans. Men smirked. Clara sat in the chair, her face burning, stripped naked by their judgment. The judge looked at Elias. Mr. Thorne, the judge rumbled. Do you have anything to say? Elias stood up. His legs felt heavy. He looked at Clara. She was looking at her lap, defeated. She believed the lie because she had heard it so many times. Elias walked to the front of the room. He did not go to the witness stand. He stood in the well of the court, facing the judge. Your Honor, Elias said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. This lawyer says my wife trapped me. He says she used her body to buy me. Elias took a deep breath. He looked at the reporters. He looked at Kincaid, who was smirking in the back row. I want the court to know the truth, Elias said. When my wife arrived in October, she asked me if I wanted to sleep with her. She thought it was her duty. She thought it was the price of the ticket. He paused. I told her no. I told her I did not know how. A titter of laughter ran through the room. Elias did not flinch. I am 26 years old, Elias continued, his voice rising. And I am a virgin? The laughter died instantly. Shock replaced it. In the West, a man admitting such a thing was unheard of. It was social suicide. I have never touched a woman until I met Clara. Elias said, I did not marry her for her body. I married her because I was lonely and I wanted a partner. And she did not trap me. She saved me. He turned to look at Clara. She was looking at him, tears streaming down her face. She had never looked so beautiful. She told me her story the first week, Elias said. She hid nothing. She is the bravest person I know. And if decency is a crime in this court, then lock me up. But do not call her immoral. She has more honor in her little finger than that man has in his whole body. He pointed a shaking finger at Kincaid. The room was silent. Even the judge looked stunned. Elias Thorne had stripped away his own masculine pride to shield his wife. It was an act of sacrificial love that no one in that room could misunderstand. Judge Abernathy cleared his throat. He looked at Sterling. He looked at Kincaid. The court finds, the judge said gruffly, that the contract held by Mr. Dalton violates the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. It is void. Furthermore, this court issues a temporary injunction against the Kincaid Cattle Company. You are to stay off the Thorn claim, and you are to cease all harassment, or I will send the marshals to burn your operation to the ground." He slammed his gavel. Case closed. The victory was sweet, but it was brief. As they walked out of the courthouse, clutching the paper that declared them safe, Percival Black caught up to them. "Do not celebrate yet," Black warned. "Kincaid has left the building." He looked unhappy. "We have the injunction," Elias said. "Paper burns." Black said, "Watch your back, Mr. Thorn. It is a long way to Blackwood." They left Cheyenne an hour later. They did not wait for morning. The city felt dangerous now, like a trap waiting to spring. They rode the bay mare, taking turns walking. They headed north, avoiding the main road, sticking to the draws and the timber lines. The first 2 days were quiet, but on the third day, as they entered the broken hills 50 miles from home, they saw the dust. Riders, 4 of them, moving fast. "They are tracking us," Elias said. He watched them through his spyglass. It was Graves and the deputies. They were not wearing badges. They were wearing dusters. This wasn't an arrest. It was a hit. "We have to lose them in the canyon," Elias said. They rode hard. The mare was tired. Stumbling on the scree, they scrambled up a narrow game trail, hiding in a cluster of boulders as the riders thundered past below on the valley floor. They spent the night huddled in a shallow cave, shivering without a fire. They dared not light one. "They have to stop for water," Clara whispered. She was cleaning the rifle. "We are almost there," Elias said. "One more day." That night, lying in the dirt, Elias held her. "You were wonderful today," Clara whispered. "What you said about being a virgin, they will laugh at you. Let them laugh." Elias said, "I don't care what they think. I only care what you think. I think you are a real man." She said. They made it to the Blackwood Valley the next afternoon, but as they crested the final ridge, looking down at their homestead, their hearts stopped. There were men at the cabin. Not 2 or 3, a dozen. They were building a corral. They were moving cattle onto the south pasture, Elias's pasture, and sitting on the porch of Elias's cabin, his boots propped up on the railing, was Cyrus Kincaid. He had ignored the injunction. He had moved in. "He has the sheriff with him," Elias said, lowering the glass. "And the mayor, he has bought the town." Clara said, "The paper means nothing here." Elias looked at the document in his pocket. It was a federal order. It was the law. But out here, the law was just ink. The reality was the Winchester in his scabbard and the man sitting on his porch. "We cannot go down there," Clara said. "They will kill you." Elias looked at his house. He looked at the land he had bled for. He looked at the woman he loved, who had finally stopped running. "If we run now," Elias said, "we run forever." He checked the load in the rifle. "I am not running." "Clara, neither am I," she said. She pulled a knife from her boot, a skinning knife she had bought in Cheyenne. "Then we go down," Elias said. But before they could move, a sound came from the road behind them. A wagon. Elias spun around, raising the rifle. But it wasn't Kincaid's men. It was Thaddeus Holt, and behind him, riding a mule, was Henderson the storekeeper, and behind him, holding a shotgun, was the blacksmith. Holt pulled up the wagon. He looked terrible, coughing into a handkerchief, but he was grinning. "Mr. Thorn," Holt wheezed. "We heard about the hearing. The telegraph is a wonderful invention. The Cheyenne leader ran the story. The Virgin and the Baron. It is quite the sensation." He pointed a shaking finger at the homestead below. "Kincaid thinks he can ignore a federal judge because he owns the sheriff, but he forgot that he doesn't own the news." Henderson nodded. He looked scared, but he was there. "My wife read the article." "Elias," she cried. "She said we treated you folks wrong. She made me bring the shotgun." Elias looked at this motley crew. A drunk lawyer, a terrified storekeeper, and a blacksmith. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. "Kincaid has 12 men down there," Elias said. Holt shrugged. "And I have a bottle of whiskey and a very loud voice. And, more importantly, I have the knowledge that a U.S. Marshal is on the train from Cheyenne as we speak. He will be here in 2 days. We just have to hold the fort until then." 2 days, Elias said. He looked at Clara. "Can we do it?" Clara looked at the townspeople. She saw the blacksmith nod at her with respect. She saw Henderson tip his hat. "We can do it," she said. Elias turned his horse toward the valley. "Let's go home." The dawn did not break. It bled into the sky. A heavy, bruised purple light filtered through the low clouds, illuminating the Blackwood Valley in shades of gray and steel. The frost lay thick on the sagebrush, brittle and sharp, snapping under the hooves of the horses as Elias, Clara, and their small, ragged band of allies crested the final ridge. The wind had died down, leaving a silence that was heavier than the gale. It was the silence of a held breath. The land itself seemed to be waiting for the hammer to fall. Below them, the homestead looked like a stranger's face. The corral Elias had built with his own hands was full of cattle branded with the Kincaid K. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney of the cabin where Elias and Clara had first slept in the same bed, separated by fear and a quilt. Men were moving in the yard, men in long dusters, cradling rifles, drinking coffee from tin cups as if they owned the sunrise. Elias sat on the bay mare, his hand resting on the stock of his Winchester. Beside him, Thaddeus Holt wiped his spectacles with a trembling handkerchief. The lawyer looked frail, his coat too large for his consumptive frame, but his jaw was set. Henderson, the storekeeper, gripped the reins of his mule so tight his knuckles were white. Smith, the blacksmith, checked the loads in his double-barreled shotgun with a grim, metallic click. And Clara, she sat tall in the saddle, wearing Elias's spare coat. Her face was pale, scrubbed clean of the trail dust, but her eyes were dry. She was looking at the cabin not with nostalgia, but with the cold calculation of a general surveying a battlefield. She had spent years being a victim. Today, she was a combatant. "They know we are coming," Elias said softly. Holt nodded, coughing into his sleeve. "Kincaid is arrogant, but he is not blind. He will have sentries." "We go in slow," Elias commanded. "No guns drawn until I say. We have the law. Let us try to use it before the lead starts flying." They nudged their mounts forward, descending the slope. The hooves crunched in the frozen mud. As they reached the valley floor, the activity in the yard stopped. The men in dusters turned, their hands drifting to their hips. The door of the cabin opened, and Sheriff Grady stepped out, followed by Cyrus Kincaid. Kincaid was wearing a heavy fur coat. He held a cigar in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. He watched their approach with a look of mild amusement, as if they were a traveling circus come to entertain him. Elias halted the mare 20 yards from the porch. The distance was close enough to speak, but far enough to miss with a pistol if one's hand was shaking. "Morning," Elias called out. His voice was steady, carried by the cold air. "Morning," Kincaid replied. "You are trespassing, Mr. Thorne. This land is under management pending a legal review. This land is mine," Elias said, "and I have a federal injunction signed by Judge Abernethy in Cheyenne ordering you to vacate immediately." He pulled the paper from his pocket. It fluttered in the breeze, a fragile white flag of order in a world ruled by force. Kincaid laughed. He took a sip of coffee. "I don't see a judge. I don't see a marshal. I just see a boy who doesn't know when to quit, a whore who doesn't know her place, and 3 town fools who are about to lose their livelihoods." "Sheriff," Kincaid nodded to Grady, "arrest these people for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Grady stepped forward, his hand on his revolver. His face was red, sweating despite the chill. "Elias, go home. Don't make me do this. You are the one making choices." "Grady," Elias said, "you are swearing an oath to a checkbook, not the law. Mr. Graves," the man with the waxed mustache, stepped out from the side of the barn. He held a repeating rifle. He racked the slide. "Enough talk." Graves said, "Drop the guns." The tension stretched tight as a piano wire. Kincaid stepped to the railing. He looked at Elias, a sneer curling his lip. "You know, the boys had a good laugh reading the paper. Elias, the virgin cowboy, is that right? 26 years old and you have never bedded a woman?" The men in the yard snickered. It was a low, ugly sound. Kincaid continued, his voice dripping with mock pity. It makes sense, I suppose. A man who cannot hold his land likely cannot hold a woman either. Tell me, does she laugh at you? Does she compare you to the men in St. Louis? I hear she had quite the roster. A professional, they say, and you don't even know how to start the engine. Elias felt the heat rise in his neck, the old shame trying to claw its way up. He gripped the saddle horn. He wanted to scream. He wanted to kill, but then he looked at Clara. She was not looking down. She was looking at Kincaid. Elias took a deep breath. He let the shame wash over him and drain away into the frozen ground. I may not have experience. Mr. Kincaid, Elias said, his voice cutting through the snickers. But I know that a man who buys people is not a man at all. He is just a wallet with a mouth. Kincaid's smile vanished. Clara nudged her horse forward, moving past Elias. She stopped 10 feet from the porch. She looked small against the backdrop of the rough men, but she sat like a queen. You call me a whore, Cyrus, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it silenced the yard. You call me a whore because it makes it easy for you to steal from us. If I am dirt, then you can walk on me. She pointed a gloved finger at him. But I am not dirt, and I was not a whore. I was a slave, and you were a partner. I saw the ledgers in St. Louis. I saw your name, Kincaid. You didn't just know Dalton. You financed him. You paid for the trains that carried girls like cattle. The revelation hit the yard like a physical blow. The hired guns shifted their feet. Being a hired gun was one thing. Being a part of a slaving ring was something that even hard men in the West found distasteful. Shut up, Kincaid snarled. Graves, shut her up. Graves raised the rifle. No, Elias shouted. He spurred the mare, driving her between Clara and the gun. Graves fired. The crack of the rifle shattered the morning. The bullet whistled past Elias's ear and struck the saddlebag of Henderson's mule. The mule panic-kicked, throwing Henderson into the mud. Chaos erupted. Smith, the blacksmith, did not hesitate. He raised his shotgun and fired both barrels at the barn. The buckshot tore into the wood, sending splinters flying and forcing Graves to dive for cover. Get down, Elias roared, grabbing Clara's reins and pulling her horse behind the water trough. The yard dissolved into a cacophony of shouting and gunfire. Kincaid's men fired from behind the wagons. Elias's group scrambled for cover behind the stone well and the heavy oak trough. Elias pulled his Winchester. He wasn't thinking about fear anymore. He was thinking about angles. He was thinking about survival. He popped up, fired a shot at a man trying to flank them near the coop, and ducked back down as wood chips exploded near his face. We are pinned, Holt shouted. He was crouching behind the trough, clutching a pistol he clearly didn't know how to use. We just need to hold them off, Elias yelled. The marshal is coming. If we live that long, Smith yelled back, reloading his shotgun with shaking hands. The firefight was ugly and desperate. It wasn't a heroic duel. It was loud, confusing, and terrifying. Bullets slapped into the mud. Horses screamed. From the porch, Kincaid was shouting orders. Burn them out! Throw a torch! Graves emerged from the barn, a lit torch in his hand. He wound up to throw it at the dry winter grass near the trough where Elias and Clara were huddled. Elias leveled his rifle. He took a breath. He aimed not for the man, but for the arm. He fired. Graves screamed, dropping the torch. He clutched his shoulder, falling back into the snow. But the torch had fallen in a patch of oil-soaked straw near the barn door. The fire caught instantly. The barn, dry as tinder, began to smoke. Stop! Elias shouted. The animals! But the fire didn't care. It raced up the wall, fed by the wind. In the confusion, Thaddeus Holt stood up. He didn't have a gun in his hand. He had the injunction. He waved it in the air, a drunken, foolish, brave scarecrow of a man. Stop! Holt screamed, his voice cracking. This is a crime scene. You are all accessories to a federal felony. Put down your weapons. A shot rang out from the cabin window. Holt spun around. A red bloom appeared on his white shirt, just below the collar. He looked surprised. He looked at Elias, his mouth opening to form a legal objection that never came. He crumpled into the snow, the paper still clutched in his hand. "No!" Clara screamed. The sight of the lawyer falling stopped the shooting for a heartbeat. It was one thing to shoot at armed men. It was another to shoot an unarmed man in a suit. Elias felt a cold rage settle in his gut. It was a terrifying clarity. He looked at Kincaid on the porch. Kincaid was smiling. Elias stood up. "Elias, get down!" Clara cried, reaching for his leg. Elias stepped over the trough. He walked into the open. Bullets kicked up snow around him. But he didn't run. He walked with a steady, relentless stride. He pumped the lever of the Winchester. He fired at the window where the shot had come from, shattering the glass. He fired at the porch railing, sending splinters into Kincaid's face. Kincaid scrambled back, tripping over a chair. Elias reached the steps. He dropped the rifle and drew his knife, the heavy Bowie knife he used for dressing elk. Grady, the sheriff, stepped in front of him. "Gun drawn! Elias, stop!" Grady warned. "Get out of my way!" "Grady," Elias said. His voice was like grinding stones. "Or I will cut you down." Grady looked at Elias's eyes. He saw death there. He saw a man who had been pushed past the point of return. Grady lowered his gun. He stepped aside. Elias walked up the steps. Kincaid was scrambling backward, trying to pull a derringer from his coat pocket. Elias kicked the gun from his hand. He grabbed Kincaid by the lapels of his expensive fur coat and slammed him against the cabin wall. "You killed him," Elias hissed. "It was an accident," Kincaid stammered, his arrogance gone, replaced by the pathetic terror of a bully who has lost his advantage. "I will pay. I will give you $5,000. Elias pressed the knife against Kincaid's throat. A thin line of blood appeared. "You can't buy this," Elias said. "Kill him." Clara's voice rang out. Elias froze. He looked back. Clara was standing in the yard, tears streaming down her face, looking at Holt's body. "Kill him. Elias, he deserves it." Elias looked at Kincaid. He felt the pulse hammering in the man's throat. It would be so easy. One motion, it would be justice. But then he looked at his own hand. It was shaking. If he did this, he would be a killer. He would be the thing he hated. He would be a man who used violence to solve the world. He took a breath. He pulled the knife back. "No," Elias said. He spun Kincaid around and slammed his face into the logs of the cabin wall. Kincaid slumped to the deck, moaning. Elias turned to look at the yard. "I am not you," Elias said to the silent men. And then, a sound cut through the wind. A train whistle, long, mournful, and close. And the sound of many horses thundering down the valley road. Riders appeared on the ridge, not hired guns, men in blue uniforms, federal marshals. They rode into the yard, guns drawn, horses wheeling. The lead marshal, a man with a mustache that rivaled Graves, looked at the burning barn, the body in the snow, and the man with the knife on the porch. "Drop the weapons," the marshal shouted. "Everyone, now!" The hired guns dropped their rifles. The fight was over. The aftermath was a blur of noise and smoke. Marshals handcuffed Kincaid. They dragged Graves from the snow. They took statements. Elias sat on the edge of the water trough, his head in his hands. He was shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical illness. They were carrying Holt's body to the wagon. Clara sat beside Elias. She didn't speak. She just rested her head on his shoulder. She was shaking too. "We won," Elias whispered. Clara looked at the smoldering remains of the barn. She looked at the blood in the snow where Holt had died. "Did we?" she asked. The marshal walked over to them. He took off his hat. "Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne, I have Kincaid in custody. We found the contract in his saddlebags, and with Mr. Holt's affidavit, we have enough to hang him, or at least put him away for 20 years. "Thank you," Elias said dull. The marshal looked at the body in the wagon. "I am sorry about your friend. He was a brave man. He was a lawyer." Elias said he believed in the paper. The marshal nodded. He put his hat back on. "We will leave a deputy here to ensure no one bothers you. The trial will be in Cheyenne next month. You will need to testify. We will be there." Clara said, The posse rode out, taking the prisoners. The silence returned to the valley. But it wasn't the empty silence of before. It was a heavy, grieving silence. They buried Thaddeus Holt on the hill overlooking the creek, under a cottonwood tree. Henderson said a few words. Smith made a cross from iron. By the time they returned to the cabin, it was night. The house was a mess. Kincaid had lived there for 3 days. There were cigar butts on the floor, mud on the rug, empty whiskey bottles. "It smells like him," Clara said, standing in the doorway. Elias walked to the window and opened it wide, letting the freezing night air rush in. He picked up a bottle and threw it out the door. He stripped the sheets from the bed and threw them into the corner. "We will wash it," he said. "We will scrub it until it is ours again." They worked for an hour in silence, sweeping, scrubbing, reclaiming their space. When they were done, they were exhausted. Elias built up the fire. He barred the door. He turned to look at Clara. She was standing by the stove, wearing her gray dress, her hair loose. She looked older than she had that morning. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," she said. "I am angry, and I am sad, and I am tired." She walked over to him. She placed her hands on his chest. "But I am here," she said. Elias covered her hands with his own. "You saved me today, Clara. When I had the knife, if you hadn't yelled, I might have done it. I yelled for you to kill him," Clara whispered. "I know," Elias said, "but hearing it woke me up. It made me realize I didn't want that blood on us." He pulled her closer. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the wind rattled the shutters. The danger was gone, but the adrenaline was still humming in their blood. A strange mix of fear and survival instinct that demanded connection. "Elias," Clara whispered. "Yes, I don't want to sleep. I don't want to close my eyes. I see Holt falling." "Look at me," Elias said. She looked up. His eyes were dark, intense. "I am not going to ask you tonight," Clara said softly. "I am telling you." "Telling me what?" "Take me to bed. Elias, make me forget the snow. Make me forget the gunshots." Elias didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms. He carried her to the mattress, which they had covered with clean blankets from the chest. He laid her down. He undressed her slowly, his hands trembling not from fear, but from reverence. He kissed the scars on her shoulder. He kissed the pulse in her neck. When they came together, it was not the tentative, clumsy fumbling of the winter. It was urgent. It was desperate. It was two people trying to merge into one creature that could not be hurt by bullets or fire. Clara guided him, her hands on his hips, her voice a low murmur of instruction and encouragement. "Yes," she breathed. "Like that. Don't stop." And Elias learned. He learned the rhythm of her breath. He learned that she liked the weight of him, the solidity of his presence. He learned that he could be strong without being cruel. When the end came, it was a release that shook them both. Clara cried out, her back arching, clutching him as if he were the only solid thing in the universe. Elias buried his face in her neck, shuddering, letting go of the rage and the terror of the day. Afterward, they lay in the tangle of blankets, sweating despite the cold air coming from the window. Clara traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "You know," she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "For a man who doesn't know how, you learn very fast." Elias laughed. It was a rusty, tired sound, but it was real. "I had a good teacher." Spring came late, but it came. The snow melted into the creek, swelling the waters until they rushed brown and loud. Green shoots of grass pushed up through the black scorch marks where the barn had been. Rebuilding was slow. Elias and Clara worked side by side. They cut timber for a new barn. They repaired the fence. They planted a garden. The town of Blackwood was different now. The prejudice didn't vanish overnight. The church lady still whispered when Clara walked by. But the men touched their hats to Elias. They had seen him walk into gunfire. They respected grit, even if they didn't understand his marriage. Henderson gave them credit at the store without asking. Smith came out on Sundays to help frame the barn. They received a letter from Cheyenne. Kincaid had been sentenced to 20 years in the federal penitentiary. Dalton, the man in St. Louis, was under investigation. It was over. And yet, it wasn't. One evening in May, Elias and Clara sat on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. Elias was whittling a piece of cedar. Clara was mending a shirt. Elias? He looked up. Yeah, do you think he has friends? Clara asked. Kincaid, do you think they will come for us? Elias stopped whittling. He looked out at the horizon. The west was big. It was full of men who held grudges and men who could be bought. Maybe, he said honestly. He is a rich man. Rich men have long reaches. Clara put down her sewing. She looked at the Winchester leaning against the doorframe. Are you afraid? She asked. Elias looked at her. He thought about the boy he had been, the one who hid in his house, terrified of the world. Then he thought about the man who had walked up the steps to face a killer. Yes, he said, I am afraid. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, and steady. But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. Clara squeezed his hand. She looked at the darkening hills. The coyotes were starting to call, a wild, lonely sound. Me too, she said. The West remained wild. It did not promise safety. It did not promise fairness. It only promised that if you were strong enough, and lucky enough, you could carve out a place to stand. Elias and Clara sat on their porch, watching the stars come out one by one over the endless prairie. They were ready. They had claimed something wilder than the land. They had claimed each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust, the snow, and the quiet resilience of the human heart. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your location. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed the tale of Elias and Clara, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of survival, romance, and the grit of the American frontier. And finally, I invite you to share your thoughts in English. Did the ending satisfy you? What do you think lies ahead for the couple? Your comments make this storytelling community come alive. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.